Hello, everyone. Let's talk about health behavior change. And let's also talk about your class projects for behavior change. So no matter what we're thinking about changing in terms of health behaviors, in some cases we're in a healthy direction. We're thinking about decreasing unhealthy behaviors. And in the literature, those are called risk factors. We are interested in increasing protective factors, which are healthy lifestyle behaviors. And in a bit, we're going to get to what we call actual SMART goals. So Prochaska and DiClemente came up with what we commonly call the stages of change model, and they actually called it trans-theoretical, trans meaning across theory. So when we think about theories of behavior change, we've got all kinds of different psychological orientations, all the way back from the psychodynamic model. We've got behavioral models, we've got cognitive behavioral models, interpersonal therapy, we've got acceptance and commitment therapy. And what Prochaska and DiClemente were really interested in, even though we've got all these different models up here, do they actually boil down to kind of like a finite number of things that really help people change their health behavior? And what they decided to study were a bunch of individuals who were former smokers who had quit smoking all by themselves, all on their own. Because if you think about it, those former smokers who had quit are experts in their own personal behavior change. And what they found were that individuals would actually go through these stages of change. And although these stages, they look linear, like you start here and then you go here and then you go here and you go here, what they actually found when they studied these former smokers is that in actuality it's nonlinear, that sometimes people will move forward. You hear the expression 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back. That in the real world, people tend to kind of, as they change behavior, circle back around or back up a little bit sometimes. But it definitely helps us as clinicians, and if we're engaging in our personal behavior change, to think about it linearly and to think about what would it take for us to get to the next step. So these are the stages. So the first stage is called pre-contemplation. And if you look at the roots of the word here, it's before you've even thought about it. Okay. So if you're talking about behavior change for somebody who's in a pre-contemplation stage, they're oftentimes going to be like, what, who, me? What do you mean? So these are people who haven't considered change. They haven't thought about it. And if you go saying, hey, you need to change your behavior, they're going to be easily defensive about it, because they haven't even been thinking about it for themselves, and they definitely don't own it for themselves. The contemplation, here we've got at the roots of the word thinking about it. So in this situation, somebody who's in a contemplation stage would be like, I don't know, let me consider it. Maybe they've thought a little bit about it, but they haven't thought very much about it. And they definitely haven't actually gone in and started changing their behavior. In the preparation stage, people are like, I want to, I would like to do this change. So they're moving forward cognitively in their thoughts, and perhaps they're moving forward behaviorally. In an action stage, it's more like, okay, I am trying to make these behavioral changes, and they're actually engaging in the behavior part, and they're beyond just the thinking about it part. In the maintenance stage, it's more like I am. So this would be, I am a non-smoker. I am a regular exerciser. I am a person who brushes my teeth, twice a day and dental flosses once a day, that type of thing. So here they've done the behavior change. They've either gotten rid of the unhealthy behavior or they've started the healthy behavior, and they've made it into a habit and a part of their lifestyle. And for your behavior change project, it is my hope that many of you will actually change a behavior and make it a permanent lifestyle factor in your lives. So again, these stages of change, they look linear. And the part that's linear helps us to think about, like, when we're working with ourselves or we're working with the client, if they're in pre-contemplation, it is not our job to try to move them into action right away. It is actually our job, think about baby steps. It's actually our job to try to move them from pre-contemplation into contemplation. And then once they've camped out in contemplation for a little bit, we try to move them into preparation. But like Prochaska and DiClemente said, in the real world, what happens to people, and again, these were those former smokers, a lot of times people will move to the next stage, and then something happens in their lives and they back up a little bit. So again, it looks linear, but in the real world, it's not always linear for people. And that's important for you all as future healthcare providers, that what we don't want happening is a provider to get frustrated with a client or a patient who's not just moving forward, and knowing that that's natural, that's kind of organic, and it's going to happen. And what do we do to handle that when it occurs? So the processes that move people forward, this is kind of, and we call these interventions. An intervention is anytime you intervene in an attempt to help somebody with their behavior change. Knowing that this is looks linear, but it's not. That's important knowledge for us to have. We do know, and there's a whole body of literature on this kind of stuff that shows that tailored interventions are better than non-tailored. So a tailored intervention would be, let's say somebody's in pre-contemplation and we're thinking they're in action when they're in pre-contemplation. We better figure out that they're in pre-contemplation and give them an intervention that is designed to move them from pre-con into contemplation, but not giving them an intervention that is assuming they are in action. Now, where healthcare providers get themselves into trouble is assuming everybody's in action, that, you know, they need to exercise for their high blood pressure. They're ready to exercise. They need to start flossing their teeth, for a dentist, as an example. They need to start flossing their teeth on a regular basis, and they're just ready to do that. So tailoring the intervention means you're getting down to their level, you're going to their stage of change, and not assuming something like action and beyond. We know that when we tailor those interventions, when we find out their stage of change and we deliver an appropriate intervention to that stage, that is so much better than non-tailored interventions. And again, the error that a lot of people make, psychologists, counselors, physical therapists, medical doctors, physician's assistants, is assuming everybody's in action. And if you start delivering an intervention, assuming somebody's in action and they're in pre-contemplation or contemplation, preparation or whatnot, they're going to be like, oh, whatever, you know, yeah, you've got this great goal for me, but I don't have this goal for me because I'm not there. I'm just not there yet. So we've got to be cognizant of that. So these are the things, kind of the life things or the interventions that help individuals in these stages. Now, for a lot of individuals, moving them from pre-contemplation into contemplation, it could be developmental. It could be something like a woman who was somebody who consumed alcohol, you know, on a social basis, and she becomes pregnant, and now she's like, oh, I'm not going to drink any alcohol while I'm pregnant. Or a former smoker who quits when she's pregnant. Or I've known a lot of women who just deliberately start eating more healthfully or start exercising on a regular basis during pregnancy. Developmental, it could be an age. I know I have a friend who was about to hit one of the 10s. I think he was turning 40 and had been slowly gaining weight over time. And there was something about this about to hit 40. Whereas like, if I'm gonna lose this midlife weight, now's the time to do it. And he ended up changing his diet, changing his exercise, and lost something like 10 pounds or something like that. Another thing, another possible developmental thing could be, and you're going to see this in the New Medicine documentary, where one of the men says, well, my dad died of a heart attack at this age and I'm about to hit this age. It could be that kind of thing. So this idea of like, well, I'm about to turn 50 and my dad died when he turned 50, that sort of waking somebody up and going, oh man, you know, I'm at this place in life where I've had relatives die. And that sometimes is motivating for people to make changes. In some situations, the things that move people out of pre-contemplation are more environmental. So let's say a job site will no longer allow you to smoke anywhere in the building or on campus or that type of thing. And so you're motivated to quit smoking because you don't want to be craving all the time on your job. And then the other things that help individuals, and we're going to talk more about this later in the semester, particularly when we get to the social support lecture and we cover motivational interviewing. This would be delivering deliberate healthcare counseling at a level that doesn't doesn't push them into a defensive mode, where they can actually, you can help them start thinking, help them start contemplating, help them start thinking about their change. At contemplation, we've got a bunch of different things that are helpful in moving people to the next step. Prochaska and DiClemente had some words that they put on some of this stuff. And the first one, it's like a hippie term to me, but consciousness raising. It's this idea like, if I become more conscious of my behavior, then maybe I will want to change it. And one of the things that I'm going to encourage all of you all to do in your behavior change project is develop some kind of self-monitoring system. So let's say you are a regular vapor. The self-monitoring system that you create, it could be like an Excel sheet where you've got every day and you've got hours of the day, and you go in and record every time you take a hit from your vape pipe and how many hits you take, as an example. So you're recording time of day and how much. For a cigarette smoker, it could be whenever they light up a cigarette, what is the day and what is the time of the day, and how much of that cigarette did they smoke, the whole thing, only half of it, whatever. In some situations, you will find apps that allow you to do self-monitoring. But here's the thing I want you to be very careful about for your behavior change project. It needs to be an app where you can record your unhealthy behavior, or if you're trying to do a new health behavior, like you're trying to exercise on a daily basis, a place where you can record the behavior and the quality of it, like how much of a cigarette or how many minutes you exercise, and it will record it and give you a recording over time. Okay. If you cannot find an app that does that, you'll want to create your own. Again, an Excel sheet, a Google sheet. You can do, I've had students in the past do paper and pencil, where they just keep a diary of their behavior on a daily basis. But what you don't want to do, because I've seen this in the behavior change project in the past, is find an app that only prompts you to do the behavior. So if you're going to exercise every day at 5 o'clock when you get off work, at 5 o'clock, it sends you a push notification and a reminder, it's time for you to go exercise. That reminder is actually what we call stimulus control. And it is not a self-monitoring device. Self-monitoring would be you are recording your behavior or lack of behavior into the device. It's not just a reminder, which is self-monitoring. That in and of itself, the self-monitoring does a couple of things. If we've already set a goal to change that behavior and we're recording it on a regular basis, it's going to make us accountable to our own behavior. It's kind of like if you're trying to eat more healthfully and it's 8:30 at night and you want to eat a couple of cookies, and you know that the cookies don't really fit into that healthier eating pattern. The idea that you would have to go record, I just ate 3 cookies, for a lot of people is enough in helping their willpower and their accountability of like, okay, I'm just going to eat 1 cookie. Or it could be, no, I don't need any cookies tonight at all. I need 0, because the idea is going to be punishing if I have to go record that. So the self-monitoring does that. Sometimes there's a healthy reactance to it, and you already start the change just because you're recording it. The recording makes you accountable to yourself. Okay. And then the third thing that it does, it starts to give you progress over time. And being able to look back at your own progress or lack thereof, if there's no progress, you're not doing all of the right things. If there is progress, particularly if there's been progress and you kind of hit a lull or you hit a plateau in some kind of case, sometimes it can be really helpful when you hit those bumps in the road or that lull to look back and go, well, look how far I've come. And then that look how far I've come, it's like, oh, I got to keep this up, or I've got to keep going, that kind of thing. So lots of things happen from the self-monitoring. Other forms of the consciousness raising, motivational interviewing, which we are going to talk a lot about later on in the semester. Motivational interviewing is the opposite of confrontation. So confrontation would be like, you need to stop drinking, or you need to stop smoking. And then you hear about these interventions where the friends and the family members get together and like, you need to stop drinking, we're sending you to rehab, that kind of thing. There is a time and a place for confrontation. However, we tend to not want to use that very often in behavior change, because for a lot of people, confrontation creates defensiveness. I would not want anybody coming into my life and going, you're doing it wrong, Denise, you need to do it this way. I would be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Hey, you're not the boss of me. And, I like autonomy and you can't tell me what to do. You're not my mom or my dad, that kind of thing. So there's time and place for it, but actually the motivational interviewing from a data standpoint, from a scientific standpoint, is much more effective, because the motivational interviewing uses stages of change to get down on their level, but it acknowledges that only the person themselves can change their behavior, that nobody can make them do that. So it acknowledges that autonomy. It is a way of interviewing them and asking them questions and reflecting their emotions and reflecting their viewpoint that tells you, hey, I'm collaborating with you and I would love to see you make this change, but I'm here to help you understand where you're at and help you to understand what would it take to get you to the next level. Okay. It's a very gentle, nicer way of encouraging change. The other thing here would be seeking information. And in a lot of situations, designing a really good self-monitoring device, whether again, paper and pencil diary or an app, that is going to give that individual a lot of information about their own behavior. Like, let's say you might discover in your vaping habit, as an example, hey, I vape every hour on the hour, or I vape when I am just bored and I don't have anything else to do. It's 10 minutes before class. What do? I'm going to go vape my nicotine, that type of thing. The other parts down here would be, and we as healthcare providers, this is where we might give somebody a pamphlet and talk with them about a pamphlet that has information in it. Nowadays, we're oftentimes pointing people to reputable websites that have more information about whatever the behavior change they're trying to do. And so this is much easier in this day and age with the internet. Where people get themselves into trouble, though, is when they're seeking information from non-reputable sites. An example would be, let's say somebody's trying to lose weight and they get on the internet and they find these paid advertisements for people promoting a book, promoting a certain kind of diet that doesn't have any scientific backing, stuff like that. So for the most part, the seeking information means, hey, I'm really, I'm thinking about this. I would like to make this behavior change. Let me see what information is out there that could be helpful to me. Every now and then landing on something not so helpful. The decisional balance is when we start thinking the pros of behavior change. Hey, if I started exercising, I would probably get less winded when I walk up the stairs. If I started exercising, I might get a little more toned. If I started exercising, maybe I won't need my blood pressure medication anymore. The cons to change would be what's getting in the way, but exercise takes up so much time. And if I If I exercise in the evening, I'm going to need another shower each day because I normally shower before work in the morning. So it's when you're taking the pros of change and the cons of change. And I can tell you that people are going to shift their behavior when the pros become, the list becomes longer and much stronger than the con list. And so one of the things that we do as healthcare providers is a little sneaky, but it's effective. We get in there and we might have people do a pros and cons list, and let's say they're contemplating stopping smoking, and let's say they've said, well, my doctor told me my high blood pressure is probably because of my smoking, and my spouse is always nagging me to quit smoking, and then they've got the cons, but I really love my cigarettes and it gives me concentration and energy to work. If I have a lull in my day, I smoke a cigarette and I can get back to work, that kind of thing. As a counselor, let's say somebody's left off some important pros. So that person might bring that up. Have you ever thought about how much money you spend on cigarettes a day? And then, or a week, like how often do you go shop and buy cigarettes? Okay, a week. Let's calculate how much you're spending a month. Let's calculate how much you're spending a year. Hey, could you use that monthly income, or could you use that yearly income for something else? Or you might say, has anybody ever complained about your breath when you're a smoker? That kind of stuff. Or have you noticed at all it's staining your teeth? Okay, so we, in a sneaky but in an effective way, we get in there and we really try to help build that list of pros for individuals, because that's going to shift their behavior and they're going to move into their behavior change. But back to this motivational interviewing point, if people have cons for change, we want to empathize with those cons. So let's say they say, hey, the cigarettes give me a pick me up and help me concentrate at work during the day. A counselor might say, yeah, I've heard other smokers speak to that same thing. Any idea of alternative things that might be able to give you a pick me up in the middle of the day and help you concentrate? And so it could be, take a 10-minute break, go take a little walk. It could be go make yourself some tea with some caffeine in it. Whatever that might be. So we want to acknowledge their cons, but we definitely want to help them add to the pros list. The values clarification, we're going to get into this big time with acceptance and commitment therapy. We're going to, add this into their goal setting, but it might be something like, let's say they can't picture changing their behavior right now. Like they can't picture not vaping right now. But then let's say it's a college student, you ask them like, well, where do you want to be in 5 years? And that person's probably going to be like, gainfully employed in a career that, a career position where I'm about ready to be promoted in 5 years. Let's say you've got somebody going, I really want to start a family within 5 years. And then you would have them reflect, can you imagine having to vape 20 times a day in your ideal career position where you're going for a promotion? Can you imagine vaping 20 times a day when you're pregnant? Can you imagine vaping 20 times a day when you've got a newborn or a toddler in your house? So for a lot of people, particularly if they're really struggling, like, I don't want to make this change right now, having them think about going into the future really can add clarity for a lot of people. I've used that quite a bit with my individuals who are struggling with eating disorders, and just sort of asking, can you imagine binging and purging 5 times a day and having a partner in your household? Or how are you going to work that career job? Or how are you going to, be taking care of a family member with that? Okay. So this is all the stuff that moves people from the thinking a little bit more into the preparation. So in the preparation stage, it's kind of like that pro and con list. Their confidence to do the change and the temptation to not do the change are equal, and we're about to tip the scales. And what we want here is their self-efficacy to be positive, and their self-efficacy is their belief. I'm going to sneeze. Maybe not. Their belief in whether or not they can do a behavior. And the best way to build there we go. To build self-efficacy is to actually start doing the behavior. So it'd be this kind of thing of like, let's say I've set myself a goal to run a half marathon, but I have never run a mile in my life. The way to build self-efficacy for your ability to run would be, okay, I'm going to go out and see if I can run a whole mile. If I can't run a whole mile, maybe I get, say, a quarter of a mile, then I'm going to walk the rest of it. And then let's say 2 days from there, I go out and I'm able to run a whole half a mile and I walk the rest of the mile. And then let's say by 2 weeks into it, I can run a mile. And then you start building up this sense of like, hey, I can get to this half marathon. I can get to this 13 miles. I've just got to train over time and build up my stamina. But I wasn't able to run a mile the first time I went out, and now I can run a mile. Okay. So self-efficacy, it's kind of like self-confidence, but efficacy is more specific to a specific behavior. Self-efficacy is not something that just magically comes to your mind. It is something that you earn. But once you earn it and then you build up this efficacy and the confidence, that's going to predict you doing the behavior. Okay. The outcome expectancy is, if I do this behavior and I make this lifestyle change, do I expect to be reinforced and rewarded for this behavior change, or do I expect to be punished? And in most situations, adopting a health behavior and getting rid of unhealthy behaviors is going to lead to positive outcomes. It might mean maybe losing a little bit of weight. It might mean having more money if you quit vaping or smoking. It might mean you're not going to get fired from your job because you've been drinking during the day when you've been working, kind of thing. And basically, we are going to do behaviors when our self-efficacy is positive, which is the cognition, and the outcome expectancy is going to be positive. Now, every now and then, as we're preparing to change, we need to think about what types of barriers or blocks are going to get in the way. And we can call this counter conditioning. We can call it replacement behaviors. When we're dealing with, particularly when we're dealing with anxiety that's preventing change, we often call that either a desensitization process, or we do an exposure therapy to help people get past their anxiety for behavior. But let's talk about alternative behaviors. And again, sometimes these are called replacement behaviors. An alternative behavior would be creatively thinking about a behavior that would absolutely prevent you from doing a problem behavior. So let's say I'm working with a vapor who likes to do brisk walks for exercise or likes to run for exercise. Let's say in their counseling, it's like, okay, well, I always want to go vape at this time of the day. And then I might say, what is a behavior instead of vaping where you absolutely couldn't vape? And let's say they say, hey, that's when I'm going to go in the middle of the day and I'm going to go walk a mile for exercise. And most people are not wanting to brisk walk and vape at the same time. And what a lot of those individuals would say, hey, I went and did my mile-long walk, and guess what? I didn't even desire the nicotine after that. I didn't want to vape. Another one that I had a client do at one point in time, she was really struggling with binge eating, binging and purging. And we were really trying to get at stopping the binge eating. And one of the things that you do is you help them back up, because a lot of times restricting food and crazy hunger ends up leading to the binge eating when somebody eats. So, you would address the restriction part. But I was asking her, okay, what is the situation you were absolutely not putting any food in your mouth to try to prevent the binge from starting? And this client, I think she had watched, there's a Seinfeld where George Costanza, every time he goes to the bathroom, does number 2, he would get naked. But that was her solution. She's like, okay, I'll get butt naked and I'll go sit on the toilet when I'm craving and I'm wanting to binge, and I will sit there butt naked on the toilet, and I'm definitely not going to put food in my mouth at that point in time. And I will make myself, while I'm sitting on the toilet naked, I will make myself a plan. How do I put my clothes back on and go fix myself a healthy meal that does not lead to binge eating? Okay. So figuring out what are those alternative alternative behaviors. If there is an anxiety situation going on, and if you are trying to target anxiety as your desired outcome in your behavior change project, you can't just set goals for, I'm going to have less anxiety. What you could do, on the other hand, is think about what kind of behavior change or changes could result in the consequence of less anxiety. So it could be, I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes in the morning, and I found a phone app that leads me through a really nice meditation, and I'm going to meditate a half an hour before bed, which would probably help improve quality of sleep. And then you might find over time, if you're self-monitoring your meditation, your 10 minutes morning, 10 minutes night, and you're recording levels of anxiety throughout the day, you might find, oh man, not only does the meditation dramatically decrease my anxiety right after it, I'm overall across the day feeling less and less stress and less anxiety. Clinically, we do desensitization techniques and exposure therapies, and that's where you expose somebody to a pretty severe anxiety for a long amount of time. And then the desensitization or habituation that occurs is when that anxiety, it peaks when you're doing an exposure, but then it dissipates and it goes away. And then you can do the behavior without experiencing that intense anxiety. We're also going to talk about this a little bit later with the SMART goals. Action. It's got a lot of different kinds of behavior change techniques to it. So self-liberation is this idea that you've got a choice that you can make, as opposed to there's no choice there, like I'm just stuck. And you can make a commitment, which is kind of going to roll back around into those SMART goals. You can make a commitment to make the change. And these can be quite liberating. I just want to tell you about this client that I had at one point in time. She had married a man with religious reasons, had not slept with him, married him, and long story short, he was probably gay. Okay. So he didn't want affection. He didn't want much sexual contact. And because of religious reasons, however, she felt very like, I'm supposed to stay married because I did my vows and I made a commitment to this man. She strikes up in mid-age, and starts to have an affair with this man who's attracted to her and is wanting to sleep with her. He's not gay. Unfortunately, this other man had a sick wife that he was caring for, who was not going to die anytime soon. So this client keeps coming to me and she feels terrible. She's married to this one man, and for religious reasons feels like she's got to keep this commitment. She's having this very enjoyable affair with this other man who's not going to leave his wife and come be with her. And she keeps coming to me and she does this like man A, man B, man A, man B. And I got sucked into it. I got sucked into this. I don't know, who are you going to pick? Who are you going to pick? And she comes to me one day and she's reminded me to always try to think out of the box. She came to me one day and she says, I've made my decision. I'm like, oh, man A or man B? And she said, I left them both. Yes. And she did. She left them both and she actually moved and kind of started life anew somewhere else. So in her situation was finding the choice where it felt like a choice did not exist, or a win-win choice did not exist, but she found the win-win. Also within this, here's the self-liberation. It's like, I'm free to make these changes. I'm free to make these choices, and just some sense of relief that the change can be made. Building up that self-efficacy is going to help with that too. The contingency management is using reinforcement or using punishment we want to reinforce healthy behaviors and increase those, and we want to punish unhealthy behaviors and decrease those. And we're going to talk more about reinforcement and punishment later. Interpersonal therapy, IPT, would be eliciting social support. So this could be the kind of thing of telling my roommates, I'm trying to quit vaping and I'm really cutting back on vaping. And I'm going to tell my roommates, I'm only going to vape outside. I'm not going to do it in the apartment. There might be some times, is it okay if I come to you and say, oh, I'm really craving, but can you talk with me for a little bit, or can we go take a short walk? Can we do something to keep me from vaping right now? And then it might be things like, let's say you're trying to get more exercise and you ask a friend or a buddy or a partner or whoever, hey, you want to start, going to the gym and working out a couple times a week with me? It'd be great if we could go together. But figuring out how to use the people in your life in a way that doesn't, bother them, but use them in a way that helps support the behavior change, in the best way for you. The SMART goals are going to fit into cognitive behavioral therapy, and we're going to talk more about those. And then making changes in your thought habits, that would be more cognitive behavioral therapy. That would be the C in the CBT. And then from a behavioral standpoint, from a behavioral standpoint, individuals might need to bolster their assertiveness skills. So let's say they're trying to eat more healthfully, how to go to a restaurant and order food and ask it to be prepared and served in a way that might be more healthier for you. So it could be something like, I've ordered this garden salad and I've asked for the dressing on the side, or I've asked for a lower fat dressing like a vinaigrette instead of, say, a ranch that has more of a mayonnaise base, that kind of thing. Other communication skills, particularly in how to get back and elicit that social support. And then figuring out how to arrange the environment in a certain way to support the new behavior. So that could be things like getting all the vaping products out of the house, getting all the cigarettes out of the house. If you're trying to eat more healthfully, getting the gooey large chocolate chip cookies in the glass container off the center of your countertop where it's going, eat me cookies, that kind of thing. So figuring out that kind of stuff to help you move forward in this actual behavioral action. Maintenance is when we have made the behavior change and we're just trying to keep it. We're trying to make it habit. We're trying to make it a regular part of our lifestyle. And there's a lot of other CBT, IPT, ACT stuff here, but two of some of the most important ones would be using stimulus control. So let's say it's wintertime in Boone and you've been exercising outside, but we're approaching bad weather. Can I afford a gym membership for the winter? So do I have the environmental support to be able to go work out inside? Or do I have enough money where I can buy myself my own treadmill so that I can exercise inside if the weather's bad during the winter months? And then the other major thing that we really focus on here is trying to prevent relapse. And then here is our goal and kind of way of thinking about relapse. With relapse, you've made the behavior change, and then usually something happens in the environment where you backslide, and we often call that falling off the wagon. And I want to give you the origins of the falling off the wagon part. So back in the old West days where they could not drill wells and bring in water, they would bring in water on these horse and carriage kind of things. They would bring in water to the town so that people would have from springs somewhere else. They'd bring it into these towns. But if you fell off the wagon, you were no longer drinking water and you were now back to drinking booze and alcohol. And so we've used that term. So like, let's say somebody's stopped drinking, but they fell off the wagon. That means they're back to drinking again, or they're back to not exercising if they started exercising, whatever that is. The stair analogy is, imagine you're on the top of the stairs. And this happened to me recently when I wore a long skirt. I was walking down my stairs and my boot clipped the back of my skirt and I slipped. I slipped on the stairs. And our natural response when we start falling down the stairs is we sprawl. And that's exactly what I did. I sprawled. I sprawled and stopped myself and put my bum on, on the stair below me. And that's the opposite of what some people do. Where they slip and they're like, oh, I guess I'm falling down the stairs. Better curl up in a ball and go all the way down the stairs. Okay. And sometimes people, when they relapse, that's kind of what they do. They're like, well, I've slipped. Oh, well, nothing I can do. And they go all the way down. What we want them to figure out how to do is if they start to slip on the stairs and they start to backtrack in their behavior change, what can they do to deliberately sprawl and stop it? Okay. And we want people to prepare for this after they've made the change. And what we want is a slip, but that does not grow into a full-born relapse. And slips are natural. They're likely to happen, but it's a skill knowing how to take a slip and disallowing it from turning into a full-blown relapse. And so slip stands for stop. That would be sort of the sprawl. Or that would be, let's say you haven't been vaping, but you're out at a bar hanging with your friends and you really want to vape again. It'd be like, okay, wait a minute, let me stop this before I do this behavior. Look around, investigate. Why am I craving a vape now or a hit? Why? What I figured when I slipped on the stairwell and I'm sitting there on my bum after I sprawled, I'm like, okay, boots and long skirts don't go together. And guess what I did? After I investigated, I was like, oh, it's this long skirt. And I was going downstairs and my boot clipped the back of my skirt. And that's why I slipped. For the rest of that day wearing that skirt, guess what I did? As I went downstairs and as I went upstairs, I took one hand and I pulled that skirt up enough that I had clearance, with my feet going up and down the stairs. And in that was my plan to proceed. It's like, okay, long skirts, they need a little lifting on stairs. So stop, look, investigate. Why is this? Why am I about to, slip? And then plan and proceed. How do I get back on track without a slip going into a full-blown relapse? So figuring out a way, if we're making for change and we're vulnerable to slipping and going back and relapsing and undoing the change, how can we readjust, or how can we plan ahead if those risky, vulnerable situations occur? How can we plan ahead so that that does not get us? Okay, I'm going to skip these. Okay, I'm going to start part 1 of this lecture. Stop it right now, and we will pick back up on the learning perspective on the next part.